Buckingham, and he's a member of the club. Should be interesting. And today we have Joe Walthrop. Joe Walthrop's from Brasstown, North Carolina. There's not many from Brasstown, North Carolina, believe me. There's one, but there's not many. I don't know if you've ever been to Brasstown, North Carolina, but there's not many around there. The father of Chuck Walthrop, one of our members, and he's going to do Natural Edge deep hollowing. Beautiful stuff here. Never had it before, so here we go. You're on.
Okay. All right.
Everybody hear him?
Okay. We've got some handouts here. We can.
Yeah, it's on.
Wait.
Yeah, that should be good.
Okay. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm Joe Waldroup from Hayesville. I live close to Brasstown. Brasstown's the home of the folk school. I don't know if any of you ever been up there, but it's in the western part of the state, just about as far as you can go. If you go any further, you'll be in Georgia or Tennessee. And I've been doing a little woodworking all my life. I really didn't turn a lot when I was younger. I got a lathe when I was about 20 years old. I had gone to a course at the folk school and started a project that I didn't get finished, so I had to buy a lathe to finish the project. And so I turned a little furniture work, spindles, and did candle holders and table legs and that sort of thing for off and on through the years. And I didn't really get into this type of wood turning until my son Chuck started turning about 06 or 07. And I still didn't do much for a few years. I helped him gather wood. And finally he taught me into turning some green wood in around 2010 or 11. And that's when I really got hooked on turning bowls, turning green wood, and I really like doing natural edge and working with all the different grain patterns, whatever Mother Nature gives us. That's what I'm looking for, the unusual patterns we have in wood. And tonight we're going to do a natural edge vase, and I have a piece of maple burl. And we harvest most of our wood, Chuck and I and lots of other of my wood turning friends get out and find wood. We salvage a lot of wood, storm damage, right-of-way clearing, trees in people's yard that they didn't want. And that's where this wood came from. A friend of mine got a contract to take this tree down because it was too close to the house. And he called me up and said, come on over and I'll give you this log. So it's a big maple burl log. And I've gotten a lot of nice pieces out of it. But I want to tell you a little about the burl that we harvest. It's not quite like you think of burl when you buy it, and a lot of it comes from New Zealand, Australian places, and it's big burls and it's all solid eye grain. Most of what we get here is smaller pieces of burl, and they grow kind of funny. They're just knots on the tree, and they grow in clusters sometimes. And what you have to figure out is how this burl patterns goes down into the tree. So in this case, you have a lot of these knobs on the tree, and they look nice, but they don't go straight down into the tree. They tend to go in a cone shape. So You might think of it as like an ice cream cone with the nice stuff on top, with a nice figure. Then as it goes down deeper into the tree, it tapers down. So when you're sawing out a block, you need to try to figure out which direction it's going and try to work it in so that you have a lot of this burl pattern in your bowl, whether it's a bowl or a vase or whatever. So that's one of the tricky parts of it, and they don't always come out good. Sometimes some are better than others. I have one here I'd like to pass around. This is one that I turned out Sunday evening when I was getting ready to do this project. It came out of the same tree that this one did, and this one's a little bigger than the one I'm going to demonstrate. But I'd like to pass it around and let you just look at how the burl patterns grow down into the wood, and there's some straight grain in between them. And so you can look at this and get an idea of what I'm looking for as I turn this. And I did core this, took a little piece out of the middle. I'll let you pass this around. This is also my backup if something goes wrong over here. And this piece, I don't want it back, so somebody can have it.
How long's that wood been cut?
That was cut last fall, but it's still wet and green. It's been cold all winter. And the wood doesn't change a lot during the winter months. You can store it about anywhere you want. There won't be a big change. The other thing that we often try to do is to get it to color, to make it spalt more. You can block it out like this and store it in a bag, a plastic bag. And it will change really fast. The color will go gray, brown, sometimes it spalts. You have to keep an eye on it because it'll go too far too fast. Sometimes it gets hunky, and so that's a bad thing. Anyway, I need to get started here, and this starts out very rough. It's cut out on the chainsaw, and I'll be using bowl gouges. Most of these I have pretty much an Ellsworth type grind. It's a swept back grind, and I like it, so I do almost all my gouges the same, basically the same grind. And I'm pretty much self-taught when it comes to technique, so I may do things a little different from the way you may have been taught to do. I've never really studied technique. I turn by feel pretty much. And the way I turn the bowl gouge is the way it feels like it's cutting best. I may roll the flute a little one way or the other because I just cut the way that it feels like a good cut. And so if you have questions or comments on that, well, speak up, please.
Safety helmets out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I always wear my shield, but I didn't put it on tonight. Can you still hear okay? This is going to be pretty out of balance for a little while till I get a little wood off of it. This being green wood, it tends to give quite a bit. I'm wondering if it's locked down good back here. I don't believe. Yeah, that wasn't holding very good. Get a little tighter now. Still not sure if that's tight enough. To start with, I just got to remove a lot of wood, and what I'll do is basically shape the base, but I don't do a final turn on this side. I'll do basic shape and turn a tenon or foot on here. This is not a lot different from turning a bowl. It's just shaped different. Move my tool rest in a little closer. I have a one-way at home, and a few things work a little different. Try to run my tool rest just a little below center. Pretty well got it cleaned down, got a little more here. There's no set rule as to how tall, how wide or anything, but for me, this type of vase works out pretty well if the height and the width of the top are pretty close to the same. I like to have the height just a little more than the width. But you know, you can make them any way you want. You can make them bigger at the top or smaller, but it makes a pretty nice shape. I have the one on the end of the table on the right there that's this basic same type of vase, and it's that proportion. It's about the same. It's a little taller than it is wide, so that kind of gives you an idea of what I'm shooting for. Meant to mention earlier, I like to start my cut with this heavy handle because you're cutting a rough cut, you're getting beat up a little bit, and this weighted handle really helps a lot for that. So I usually start with that. And I'm going to go ahead and work on turning the tendon now. And just to see what I've got, this one's about 8.5 inches tall, and I'll take a little more of that off the bottom. And it's right around 8 inches across here, so that's a good proportion. And you can see the burl figure starting to show up, and it's got some ambrosia lines, and so this one's going to have a pretty good figure. Also, another thing you want to look at, if you can, have your wings or whatever sticks up on top. If you can have kind of a balance on those. Before when I started this, when I laid it out, I placed it between centers in a position where it looked like the top of the bark is going to be about the same on this side as it is on this side, with a little recession in between. So that should give it a pretty nice balanced look when it's finished. And need to have the size of the tendon actually at the smallest that the chuck will close up to. And I use that, but I had to borrow one of Chuck's chucks tonight, so I'm going to have to measure it and see what's going to work there. Just get an approximate measurement here, so I'm going to have a little bigger chuck than a little bigger foot than I usually put on there, but that's okay. Actually, it's better to have a bigger foot on here, because on a vase it's taller, so when you put it in the chuck, you've got a lot more hanging out, and so you have more torque on your tenon, and it's more apt to break off than it is on a more shallow bowl. I cut this tenon or foot pretty much square. You can leave a little dovetail on them. The jaws I use work pretty well. But pretty much a square cut. And you can use a spindle gouge or detail gouge to cut this corner out, to clean it out nice and square. I've got a little ground down skew that I've had for 100 years, and I just ground it out so that I can do this little detail cut here. It's something I've used a long time, and as long as you keep it fairly sharp, it cuts pretty well, and you can make a little clean out cut there so that the jaws of your chuck fit nice and snug. You always want the face of your jaws on your chuck to make good contact right here against the base of your bowl. So now we're ready to turn it around, put it in the chuck, and I leave this center point on here. The way I do most all my bowls, I turn them green, and I let them dry for a few weeks, few months, whatever. Then I come back and sand them. When I sand them, I put them back in the chuck. So I leave the tenon on here while they're drying so that I'll have something to hold them with when I come back to sand. Now, when you put them back in the lathe to sand, they're distorted a lot after they dry. So it's kind of hard to sand just by holding sandpaper on the bowl like you do when you're turning dry wood. So I use a rotary sander most of the time. I use like an offset drill or a rechargeable drill. Recently I've been using a Fordham. Works really well. Use soft pads, and so that's the way I do most of my sanding. And I'll show you later how to take that foot off if our time works out in the second part. I should have mentioned earlier, this is a spur drive that fits in the chuck, which is real convenient. I like it. And I hope this is going to tighten down. Yep, looks pretty good. It's a good thing if you can have your jaws almost closed, because you get a better grip on your tenon. If your tenon is bigger, then you get more of the corners of the jaws making contact. When they're almost closed, you get a more uniform contact, so you get a better grip on there that should stay put. Now, I usually engage the tailstock when I start here, because this is still out of balance a pretty good bit. So use the tailstock as long as you can. And I'm going to move to a about now? Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Ain't one thing, it's another. Okay, can you still hear me? Now, the reason I don't do my finished cut before I turn it back around is because when you take it from between centers and put it back in the chuck, regardless of how good a job you do turning this tendon, you almost always have a little bit of run out. It's not going to be perfectly round. So that's why I wait till this step to do my final shape. When I engage the tailstock here, I don't put a lot of pressure on it. If you put a whole lot of pressure, you kind of compress the foot a little bit. Then when you release it, you still might have a little run out there. And for me, good lighting is a must. I don't see that well anyway, and so I need light to shine on the area where I'm cutting. And I like these little flexible lights. They do real well. The biggest problem I have is finding a good place to mount them. My one-way has a curved top over here on the headstock, so it's pretty hard to get it to sit on there. This works out real well here with the flat top. For me, it works best to look across the top of a bowl, vase, or whatever I'm doing. I get a little better feel for the shape of it. And if I look straight down where I'm cutting, I don't seem to do quite as well with my finished shape. I usually, on a vase like this, I'll usually leave the bottom a little bigger than the actual finished size, because I come back after I sand and reshape that bottom. So I leave it a little bigger right in this area. Still got a little chainsaw cut there. I'm going to have to make it a little smaller at the top. can't really tell you what the best proportion is for the bottom, for the base, but usually I'd say about a third to a fourth of the top width works out pretty good. Still got a little more saw cut right there. I'm using pretty much a shear scrape here. Can usually get 2 lines out a little better. That looks pretty good. Got a little tear in the end grain here, but not too bad. I think I'll try one more pass with another sharper tool. Okay, that's pretty good. And now I'll start taking the inside out. I like to take a little bit of this out just for balance, just with the tailstock still in. Get rid of a little bit of this, get rid of some of the offset weight, and then I'll take the tailstock away. Any questions? Comments so far? All right. I'm going to use this tool with a heavy handle for that for 2 reasons. One, it's a little bit dull already, and when you're cutting bark's more abrasive than regular wood, so I'm kind of using up what's left of my last sharpening on this one to get rid of that bark. This dolly's mounted on here permanently, isn't it?
I couldn't hear what you said.
This dolly right here, it can't be moved. Okay.
Step up
Yeah. Any of you ever watch Rudy Lopez demonstrate? He carries a box. He's not very tall, and so he stands on that box to turn. It kind of gives him an advantage though when he's doing the inside of a bowl, or especially a vase, because he's down where he's looking straight in. I've often wished that my lathe had some way I could just elevate it when I start doing these vases and deep forms like that. So I can take the tailstock out now. And check the tightness here. I'll do most of this, at least to start with standard 2 rest, and then I'll use different 2 rests to go inside that has a straight side and a little bend on the end. Now I like to work with my 2 locked into my side when I can, but in this case I just can't get in that position, so I have to kind of freehand it out here. It's a little awkward, but it's about the only way I can get it done. A lot of this cut is just a matter of hogging it out. There's not any finesse to it until you get down to the side. pretty much have to take quite a bit of material out of the center just to get room for your tool rest. Sure. Yeah, that would help. I could probably stand out here. Yeah. Thank you. I have a one-way at home, and I use an outboard bed on it, which is a short bed that goes on the outside. In other words, it would be like on this end. And so I'm used to standing out on the end like that. So this will help a lot. Yeah, that is better. Yeah. Okay. I think I'll take my watch off. Yeah. Yep, it's you have to work inside of here, so you're working really close to that edge. These are, the more open they are, the easier they are to do. The toughest one that I've done is the cherry bowl there, vase with the wings on it. That's a maple crotch, and the wings are very close together, and it makes the turn a lot tougher than one like this, because the wings are turned in, and they can catch your arm pretty easy. And the wood's kind of tough to cut in the center of the crotch too. Right here, I really got to get my light focused right to see down the inside of the vase here. It's pretty critical to be able to see your cut, and it's harder to get the light adjusted than it seems like it ought to be. kind of make these cuts in steps. A lot of the cuts are kind of in the transition, and you don't have real good bevel support when you get down that far, but got to get the wood out of the way before you can start the right wall thickness, and get your two rests in there pretty tight. Little touch in there, a little too close. I like to turn these about somewhere around 5/16, maybe a little more. I don't always do exactly the same wall thickness, just depends on the piece I'm doing, but I think I'll go with that. That's a little thicker than I turn sometimes. Okay, that's not bad down to about there. Still having a little trouble getting my light exactly the way I want it back in there. Let's try that. I think that'll work a little better. Actually, I think I'll change two refs now. I've got a You hear me now? Okay. The two rests that I have at home is basically like this with a little sharper bend in it, but it won't fit in this banjo. Okay. tool rest just a little too high. I don't have a lot of room to let it down either. Clean out the shavings a little. Not too bad there. This burrow's a little hard to cut through because you got straight grain between the eye pattern, and the eye pattern's a little denser than the straight grain. So it's a little tough cutting. Still rubbing a little. I think that's about as far as I can go. Just having to run the tool rest a little higher than I like to. The tough part of this is when you're going down the side of the wall, you're riding a bevel pretty much. But then when you transition into the bottom, you lose your bevel support, and it makes a little less controlled cut. But I've got to get that bottom hogged out some to give me some room for the two rest. You know, when you're turning a conventional bowl, open bowl, you can leave a lot of wood in the bottom until you're pretty well finished with the sides. But with these, you've got to stay ahead on taking your bottom out to give you room to get your two rest further back in there. And then as you work it down, you can start to finish your walls up. That's pretty good down to there. Getting a little more difficult to reach down in there. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing there, but I'm going back into the bottom and actually coming back out backwards. So I'm cutting on the lower edge, kind of a shear scrape actually, but it's not a finish cut by any means. Sometimes I have a little problem with the shavings building up against the two rest. I think it'd be a good idea on a two rest if they would make these with a slight angle here so that this part of the two rest was sloped away from the bottom It would give you more clearance when your shavings build up inside. Okay. Now, if I can move my tool rest in a little deeper, it'll help. Okay. And I need to check my wall thickness right there. Take a little more out there. This wood transfers light real well. It's not that thin, but you can kind of see through it a little bit. Pretty close there. Now when I'm making that cut, I just feel for where it cuts and kind of roll the flute. If I'm getting too much, I need to roll toward me a little. If I'm not getting enough, I roll it up a little more. And I think I need to check my bottom depth now. I've got a homemade tool that I do that with. May have to take the banjo off here to get enough room to do that. Maybe not. This is a homemade tool. I first saw Chris Ramsey use one of these. Then later I saw one in American Woodturner magazine in the tips section, and they made these with 3 pieces of wood, a board here, here, and here, with joints in it. And I thought, well, if you use a piece of plywood, it wouldn't have any joints in it. So you just take a square rectangular piece of plywood and saw it out to go inside your bowl. And this will contact the bottom. This point will be square with the bed of the lathe. And then this block is cut so that it is exactly the same as the jaws of the chuck. So you slide that up against the headstock, and then this slides inside here. I don't know if that's gonna, didn't really want to take that off, but I guess we'll have to. And you can slide this right up to the bottom and then measure this distance. And this looks real good. I got lucky actually. I thought it was a little further than that, but my target is a 1/2 inch. That's what I like to leave the bottom. And that is about 7/16. So I'm in good shape. That leaves me enough wood when I come back to return the bottom that I can take some of this out. The reason I need to is because it's going to distort as it dries. And so after it dries, I sand it, and then I'll put it in a jam chuck. I'll show you that in a minute. And I need to take a little of this off to get it back flat so it sits nice and level. So that's why I like to leave around a 1/2 inch there. And these are real simple to make. Anybody can make one. Just a piece. Sure. And if I were doing another one, I would do one thing different. See, I put 2 little blocks of wood. That's to carry it across this opening in your bed. I would just make one, if I make another one, just put another piece of plywood across the bottom. And that way the edge of it can come to this point out here. So when you slide it in there to measure, instead of having to measure here, you'll have the corner of your plywood right out here, and it'll be a little easier to look straight down on to make your measurement. Always come off easier than they go back on. Okay. All right, I should be able to finish this bottom out pretty quickly. Not that quick. A little more. All right, I'm gonna call that done. I usually do a little more, take a little more pains on the bottom, getting the two lines out, but running a little short of time here I'd like to show you the rest of this other part if I can. So we'll move on to that. No, it usually stays on real good. Unless the wood is a little punky or spalted, now then it'll come off. If the bark wants to come off, I let it come off. What I really like on maple is when it's aged a little bit and maybe spalted a little and the bark comes off pretty easy, it will usually have a nice brown patina on the wood under it, and it looks real good. Pass this around if you want. Now for the next part, I'm going to show you how I take the tendon off. And I use a jam chuck. Let's see, I got to change chucks here too. But I use this one most of the time. When I need an extension, I've got another one that fits on it. And you can use these separately or together. Pretty handy little deal. Did you get the other one? Yeah, I had to change chucks because my tenon on my jam chuck is smaller. Now, I've got another one that I did probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. And it's dried and sanded. I did that at home, of course, and sanded everything except the base right here. Okay, I use, there it is. I just use a piece of foam pad. You can use a mouse pad or lots of different things. I like a foam pad because it gives just a little bit. This is not round anymore. It was when I turned it, but it has become oval shaped or egg shaped, all of the above. And let's see, took my glasses off somewhere. Okay, I don't put a lot of pressure on this because you can bust your bowl, your vase, or whatever you're doing if you press it in too tight. But it doesn't take a whole lot to hold that. You just want enough pressure on it to keep it in place. And I usually push on it a little there, see if it gives, and tighten a little more. Get it pretty firm there. And what I'm going to do is take this tenon off now and finish the bottom. And if time allows, I'll shape this base here too. You see how much out of round it is? A lot of people go ahead and finish their base while the wood's still green. But I kind of like to screw it up like this. Like I was telling you earlier, you have to take a little wood off here because this is not round and flat anymore. Usually it doesn't take too much, but if you know you have a ½ inch or so left on your bottom, you can take a little off. And then I like to take a little out of the middle so that the center of the bowl, center of the vase, will not touch the table or whatever it's sitting on. And that leaves me just the rim. Now, this is a good time to do a little decorative thing that I like to do on the bottom. I've got a homemade texturing tool. Doesn't really work very well, but this is about all I use it for. And it's I bought this just a cutter and put it in an old power handle, and it doesn't fit real good, but it still does the job for this. Make just a little cut there, and then I come back here, makes a little spiral cut, and then I can just kind of outline that with this little pointing tool. And that gives you a pretty nice little detail. Nothing fancy, but it's easy to do. And that's been kind of my little signature mark. One good thing about it, this little cove, this transition here, usually has a little tear in it, so it kind of hides that or gets rid of it. And it's fairly easy to sand too. Now, the other thing I like to do is reshape the base here. You can leave them like this, and it's okay. But when this is distorted, this is probably kind of egg-shaped here, and then this pattern you cut here is round. So it doesn't look real good. You know, it looks a little off-center, a little off-balance when you're looking at the bottom. So I like to return this base. I'll show you that. That thing. Those can back off a little bit. I have a problem with mine doing that. That's one reason I like to do this detail in here first, is because sometimes you have a little movement out here. Now I'm cutting away some of my wood here, and I know it's going to be a little thinner on one side than it is the other because it's warped. I'm taking more off one side than the other. But I usually leave them a little thicker right here in this part of the bottom, so it works out okay. Now, if you have a real thin wall bowl and you do this, there is a possibility of cutting through it, but so far that's not happened. And it makes your vase look a little better. When I first started turning these, I did one once, and I didn't reshape this. And when I set it up on the shelf, the base was off center. I mean, it looked like it was very noticeable. It just wasn't in the middle. Somebody bought it though, they must have liked it. Okay. That's all I'm going to do that. Now this looks like a pretty big problem here because you got this hump, this shoulder. But it's really not very hard to sand out. You can blend this back in. So when you get that done, you have your base is round and concentric with the bottom. And then it just blends back into the rest of the base. And I'll show you quickly how to do that. Just use a rotary sander. I've been using a Fordham a lot, and it works real well. But I've used these a lot too. Okay, that's 80 grit, and I would go on 120, 180, 220, 320, and it'll blend together, and you can't tell where you've cut the old cut and the new cut starts. And the only thing I like now is to take this piece out of the middle, and here again I use a homemade tool. I just kind of pare this thing out. I do need to check. See, I've got space here between the rim and the center. I don't know if you can see that. But you can lay any kind of straight edge there, and just check, make sure that your center point here is not higher than your rim. It's fine. I'll do all this with a rotary sander. I can hold that in my hand. Just, it's not a big problem. This little tool, it works real well for me. I've been using it a long time. Of course, you can do this with a detail gouge or whatever you want to use. You can even use a parting tool. But it works pretty good. You can start cutting with the tip and take a real fine cut and just push. And take a real light cut. And it cuts pretty clean. It's basically just scraping, but when you're cutting with kind of pushing that tip, it kind of peels off. And I just take this down to where it's real small. I don't cut all the way to the bottom. I usually leave a little high spot on the bottom, and then I can break it off and without pulling a chunk out. If you cut right here, if you cut real deep right in here, and then you try to break it off, sometimes you get a little chunk of the bottom comes out with it.
Is that like a skew or?
Yeah, it's an old skew that I ground off. The reason I grind this back is so I can get in here. See, if I had a full width, it would be cutting on the heel. But see, I can get in there pretty tight.
Hold it up so he can see it for a little while.
And it's hand ground. You should really make a jig to grind these if you make one. But I just go to the grinder and do it freehand. And as long as you got it sharp on the tip, it'll cut pretty nice. And I use it for lots of little things, like a lot of times I'll clean out this cut here a little more if I want a sharper line here. Works real well for that. You can cut this way, and then you can roll it over and cut that way. Just, you can't take a big cut with it, but for little detailed cuts, it works real well. So now I just take it out. And that usually breaks off. See, I leave a little wood there. I don't know if you can see that. But see, if you cut that in there real flat and you have a piece of burl where the grain runs this way, or especially an end grain, and you break it off, you might sometimes pull out a little piece of your bottom, and then it's really hard to get it sanded out. So that's why I leave that on there. And that sands off pretty easy. Just any kind of rotary sander. sounds a little crazy, but instead of rolling the two around, if I turn the whole vase around in my hand, I get a little better job. It's kind of like turning the ladder instead of the light bulb, you know. It works. The good thing about this little decorative cut, it doesn't, you know, you don't have too much trouble sanding it out when you're doing this. I started out doing a bead here, which looked pretty nice, but when you go to sand it, it's real hard to sand in here without sanding your bead off. All right, I'll pass this around. You can look at that too. And meanwhile, any questions or comments?
What do you usually use for a finish?
I use wipe-on polyurethane most of the time. I do about usually 4 to 5 coats, and I sand between coats. I usually sand to 320 on my finish sanding, and then I put a coat of finish on, and then I go back with 400, and I sand it just like I was sanding dry wood. I'm taking the finish back off. What that first coat does is to seal the wood. It doesn't really build up. You don't want it to build up, or I don't. And then I put another coat on, and I do the same thing again. I sand with 400. Then, after the wood's sealed, by the time I go to the third coat, I can usually start wet sanding after that. And the wet sanding goes much faster, and the water won't penetrate into the wood once you get those first 2 coats on. Sometimes it takes 3 coats to seal it. But if you wet sand with just 1 coat, the water sinks into the wood, the grain lifts back, and you're kind of starting over again. I have a few other vases that I brought to show, and I've been doing some carving the last year or so, and so I have a few vases that I've carved on, and this was a sycamore vase that I had planned to twice turn, but it was kind of thick, and I got to looking at it, and I thought, well, I might just carve it. So I came up with this kind of flower pattern, spiral. Actually, this type of spiral is kind of a John Jordan style. I mean, I've not seen him do vases, but it's similar to the type of carving that he does, and I like his work a lot. And then I did this one. I have seen some pottery work, glassware, other things that I like a lot. So I decided to try to simulate their work, and this is one of the ones I've done. I just did this one a few weeks ago. So I turned it just like a vase would be turned, rim up here, and I left a ring around here, and then I carved away the ring to make it look like a pitcher, and then I sawed this part out, the shape of that, and then hand carved this back here. What I was okay. When a potter throws a piece like this, he turns it and shapes it. I've never done it, but looks like fun. And then they wait till it gets to a certain dryness where they can cut it and shape it. And they take some kind of tool, knife, and they would cut this off and leave this wing sticking up. and at a certain moisture content, it will bend. And they bend it down and shape it, do a lot of hand tucking and everything, and then I guess they fire it. But I wanted to simulate the look of what they would be doing to try to make this look like it's bent. It's carved, of course. But that's been a fun thing. Chuck and I have been doing a lot of this type of work, and if you look at other people's works, other types of materials, you get some good ideas from that. And it's fun then to see what you can do in wood. And one other piece I've got here is a cherry wing bowl. This is a cherry crotch, and if you can look at it, the forks went this way and this way, and the main tree down here. So if you do one of these there, you'll find it pretty hard to find a piece of wood that works out. If you can do a small one where you let the natural edge go all the way to the outside of the fork, but this is between the piths. In other words, the pith came down through here, and you have to get a pretty big tree to cut one of these out of, and they're kind of hard to locate the pith. But anyway, they make a pretty nice looking piece, and they're a little difficult to do, but makes something different, you know. So I guess that's about all I've got for tonight. Thank you.